Well, let's move on now to the rest of the news here. We heard today from the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, who said that the upcoming federal budget may actually downgrade forecasts for economic growth, and he's blamed international uncertainty.
We know that it's not mission accomplished because people are still hurting. And you can expect to see in the budget a focus on cost of living help. A tax cut for every taxpayer will be the centrepiece of the cost of living help in the budget, and if we can afford to do a little more than that, then those decisions will be taken in the next week or two.
For more, let's bring in macro business chief economist Leith Van Onselen. Leith, thank you so much for joining us. What does this mean for any sort of cost of living relief measures in the upcoming budget?
Well, Jim Chalmers has already confirmed that cost of living relief will be included in next week's budget. He's also said that this relief is going to take the edge off inflation rather than add to inflation. So this, to me, sounds like we're going to see a further extension of Commonwealth rent assistance as well as energy subsidies. And to be quite frank, Danica, the federal government's created the rental crisis through its massive immigration policy. It's also contributed to the energy crisis by completely messing up energy policy. So I think the least it can do is provide us with some subsidies to cover the pain.
Well, you'd hope so. And I do want to get to immigration with you because there has been yet another record month for that. But just on this forecast, what does this mean for the economy more broadly?
Yeah, so it provided these subsidies are calibrated correctly to target areas of, clear inflationary pressure. So like in the rental market and energy prices, they can actually take some steam out of the CPI inflation and actually help the RBA do its job in getting inflation under control. So they can actually be positive, provided they're calibrated correctly and they don't just give money to people to pump up inflation.
Yeah, and despite this, though, the Treasurer said today that he's still hopeful of a budget surplus. Do you see Australia getting to that point still?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the federal government's undoubtedly going to deliver a budget surplus this year. The reason for that is the surplus has been driven from three booms. So we've had record immigration, which has increased the number of workers, record bracket creep, because taxes have all gone up, and also record high commodity prices. The big question is what will happen going forward. We're likely to see commodity prices fall, which will reduce company taxes. We're also likely to see a rise in unemployment. That's actually already forecast, as well as lower levels of immigration. So that'll take the sting out of the federal budget going forward.
All right, well, let's talk about immigration now. This is the big one. A key reason the budget is on the verge of surplus is because of record migration, with more workers paying income tax. And, of course, not to mention that record rise in bracket creep. We hear all the time, Leith, that record migration is like a Ponzi scheme. Is this just another example of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the federal government's the major beneficiary of Australia's immigration program because it collects 80% of the nation's taxes, whilst the costs are basically pushed onto, the states and onto you and me. So the federal government's been the main beneficiary of this massive 550,000 migrant increase last year, and that's because it's basically juiced personal income taxes and company taxes. The flip side of that is the poor old state governments have been left with the costs providing services and infrastructure to the ballooning population. And that's why our state governments are actually drowning in debt and they're facing credit rating downgrades. So if I was the states, I'd be screaming blue murder about this, Danica, and I'd be demanding money from the federal government so that they provide money for every new resident that lands in their jurisdiction, to provide money for infrastructure, etc. And I guarantee you, if the federal government was required to pay the states, say, $50,000 per new resident, the federal government would cut immigration quick smart because it'd have to balance the benefits with the costs. Because at the moment, Danica, all the federal government sees with immigration is dollar signs.
Absolutely, and this is a problem. You mentioned infrastructure. The amount of arrivals are completely outpacing construction. So the state governments have got that on their hands because houses are not being built, and that's a whole other issue. But without immigration, Leith, would you say that we would actually be in a recession right now?
Oh, 100% we've been in a recession. We're actually already in a per capita recession. So the nation's growth actually fell by 1% last year in per capita terms. And all that tells you is the economy is not growing fast enough, as fast as the population. So we're going backwards per head. It's the same for housing. We're not building housing to keep up with immigration. We're not building infrastructure to keep up. We don't have the business investment to keep up with immigration. So our productivity is going backwards. Basically, we've got what I call a rat wheel economy. We're spinning around in circles, but we're not going anywhere. In fact, we're going backwards.
Yeah, we are. And yet Labor has promised that they would actually bring down the rate of immigration. But if you look at the latest figures that were released just last week, a 20% increase in February compared to January. It was an increase of an extra 100,000 people, which is absolutely extraordinary. When are we going to be feeling the impacts of the constant rise in the migration rate?
Well, we actually already are. I mean, you just have to look at the rental market. The rental vacancy rate's at a record low of just 1%. Obviously, rents are going through the roof. We're seeing people being thrown into homelessness, having to live in group housing, etc. So that is the most visible impact of it. The other impacts you're seeing if you live in Melbourne or Sydney, for example, you're seeing increased traffic congestion. Everywhere you go now, it takes longer. Basically, your standard of living is being slowly strangled by this high immigration. So it really does need to come down. It's growing faster than the economy can cope, faster than housing, faster than infrastructure, and faster than business investment.